Your ears do not deceive you. You have just entered the Cryptid Creator Corner brought to you by your friends at Comic Book Yeti. So without further ado, let's get on to the interview.
Y'all, Jimmy, the Chaos Goblin, strikes again. I should have known better than to mention I was working on my DC Universe meets Ravenloft hybrid D&D campaign on social media. My bad. He goes and tags a bunch of comics creators we know, and now I have to get it in gear and whip this campaign into shape so we can start playing. Another friend chimes in, "Are you going to make maps?" It's fair to say it's been a while since I put something together, so I guess, question mark? It was then that I discovered Arkenforge. If you don't know who Arkenforge is, they have everything you need to make your TTRPG more fun and immersive, allowing you to build, play, and export animated maps, including in-person fog of war capability that lets your players interact with maps as the adventure unfolds while you, the DM, get the full picture. Now I'm set to easily build high-res animated maps, saving myself precious time and significantly adding nuance to our campaign. That's a win every day in my book. Check them out at arkenforge.com and use the discount code YETI5 to get $5 off. I'll drop a link in the show notes for you, and big thanks to Arkenforge for partnering with our show. I think I'm going to make Jimmy play a Goblin Warlock just to get even. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cryptid Creator Corner. I'm Byron O'Neill, your host for today's Comics Creator Chat. Joining me today is newcomer to our show, John Harris Dunning. John is the writer of several graphic novels, including Tumult, Wiper, and Salem Brownstone, and he's co-created the Comics Unmasked Art and Anarchy in the UK at the British Library, which is the largest exhibition of comics in the UK to date. At least I believe that's still the case. Is that still the case, John?
Still the case.
All right. And he's contributed to Rolling Stone, GQ, Esquire, and The Guardian, among others. And he's writing a new miniseries dropping soon called Summer Shadows with Dark Horse Comics, with art from Ricardo Cabral, colors by Brad Simpson, and lettered by industry veteran Jim Campbell, a team he's already well familiar with as they all worked on Wiper together. So, John, welcome to our little show. You doing well?
Yeah, so well. I'm really excited to talk to you. I'm a big fan of the show, and I'm really, really pleased to be on it.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's funny because I feel like I've been globetrotting lately. You know, in 7 days, I will have talked to comic creators in Africa, Greece, New York, and Canada. So it's been a busy one, and it reminds me of my days traveling around on the road working with bands, although I know my body couldn't take it these days.
Yeah, exactly. This is a much better version of it. Much easier to handle.
Well, I was reading, and among other things in your bio, kind of which reminded me of the road days, you had that bit about dancing with Britney Spears, which I can't claim to do, but I was the guy managing her onstage quick change shroud on the Oops, I Did It Again tour. So if you happen to be a dancer or something on that tour and I've forgotten, please forgive me. So
Absolutely not. No, I actually just was with her on the night that she did her film premiere for Crossroads in London.
Okay.
And I happened to know the producer, and we were just kind of put together in a sort of VIP room and just left for about 2 hours. And all that was in this room was a sort of quite small circular room, was a big pink satin heart-shaped bed. And so we just kind of said hi, rather sort of like nervously and kind of embarrassed, and then sat on this bed and made like conversation. And they started playing disco music, and we just danced, and then danced for probably about half an hour, and then people started coming in, and then the party started. But it was so surreal. And obviously that was many years ago, so she was a big star, but she wasn't sort of as iconic as she is now. I feel about that now, but she was a very nice girl, and she was very sweet and very polite, and very good dancer. So bless her.
Man,
times to go through after that, I can tell you.
That sounds way more fun and less like work. As my primary role was making sure that like the eyes of the local stagehands stayed forward, so they didn't kind of peek over their shoulder during quick changes. So
I don't know. I think that sounds quite fun too. Quite an interesting job.
It was a good time. Good way to spend your 20s for sure.
Yeah, too right.
All right. Well, let me quickly set the stage for Summer Shadows. First of all, I got a chance to read the first issue, and the book is great. I loved it. You're narratively tackling quite a lot of things. You have horror and mystery and romance, and I can't say I have any real idea where it's going exactly, and that's exciting. Right? Because I hate too much exposition and being spoon-fed everything. So you've got Nick Landry, who is headed out to one of the more unexplored and less touristy Greek islands looking for his ex-boyfriend. He's a bit stuck after a breakup, can't quite get through it, can't quite let things go. And there's also a series of kind of mysterious disappearances on the island that are now being investigated by a Coast Guard officer. Um, and so those disappearances appear to be somehow linked with a jet black super yacht that kind of happens to be in the area. And I want to start off with the island itself as a character because it plays such a huge role in the story. Forgive me if I mispronounce this, but is Araxos is that an actual island? Because I tried to look it up, but
No, it's
yeah.
not. It's not an actual island. I've made up the name of Avraxos because the first rule of Fight Club and the first rule of the island I go to is I'll never say where it is because I don't want
Okay.
anyone finding it. So
Okay.
it's a beautiful little island. It's in an island group called the Cyclades.
Yep.
And yeah, it's fabulous. I've been coming for about 10 years and I spend about two and a half months every summer here, working and writing and just being here. I know a lot of people here now, both locals and people who visit, and it's a fantastic place, and it's really inspiring. It's very wild. I live in London. I live in a big city. It's hardcore. I love it, but it's lovely to get away and just be on the rock and the ocean and all of that. And it's really interesting. So I love the fact you picked up. I mean, for me, the island is a character, like it's maybe even the lead character. In fact, interestingly, um, I'm going to do the thing that I always hate on podcasts where people refer to things that they can't remember the names of. But the initial title of the book was called The Island.
Okay.
And there is a very famous painting from the 1800s, a symbolist painting, which is called the Island of the Dead, I think. And it's basically like two rocks and then a sort of boat coming up with a sort of sailor or a shrouded figure who's rowing the boat to this sort of this strange island. And so that painting and this island sort of started coming together, and this idea of how did I put it? I think I termed the genre beach gothic. This idea of kind of Lana Del Rey, Born to Die, that album, film noir, all these kind of murders happening on the beach and these tropical nights. There's something interesting about that. These ideas that should be really conflicting, somehow coming together. So that was how the island started to inspire me. What's quite spooky, Byron, is that lots of people have gone missing on the islands this summer.
Okay.
There was actually, I think, a cop from Los Angeles who went missing on an island. There's a very famous British presenter who went missing on another island. And they go out walking and they never return. So that's kind of how, as you know, this mystery starts. And it wasn't inspired by that because it hadn't really. I wasn't really aware that did happen. Of course, what it's really about is heat waves and people, going out in the midday sun, not understanding how hot it is and disappearing. But it was strange. It was a very strange echo. As we're getting ready to launch this, it's happening. These people are going missing on the island, so it felt like a very strange resonance.
Yeah, that's sort of convenient, oddly.
I didn't do it. I promise, Byron.
Oh yeah, I believe you. Yeah, I
Not my
mean,
fault.
it's really interesting topographically. Like I've been to Santorini and I've breezed through, I don't know, God knows which Greek islands on various music tours. And audience, don't hate me for not remembering. You spend all your time working and rarely do you actually get to do all that much and actually see the places that you are.
Yes,
If you're
right.
lucky, it's laundry, right? Like
Yeah,
that's just the nature of that business. But
yeah,
I've got a rough idea of the lay of the land anyway, and it's an interesting locale to choose because it conjures all those idyllic scenes of whitewashed walls and blue domes, although there aren't actually really that many blue domes in Santorini. Um, but it's a transection of the desert biome meeting the sea, which
that's
isn't the
exactly
first
right.
place. Yeah, it's not the first place you think of when you historically think of vampires. Okay, which
So
vampires are in it. It's in the advanced solicits, so we can talk about it. But
we can talk about it. Yeah, that's not a plot spoiler. But
yeah.
basically, here's how it started. I often find that as a writer, luckily, I work in a very visual media because I'm really stimulated narratively by images. And this island that I come to is not so far from Santorini. That's the same. That's the same island group, the Cyclades, and obviously that place is like a sort of hateful, center of like Elon Musk and sort of billionaires going and
Yeah.
just spending just ridiculous amounts of money in these obscene yachts. And so every now and then on this island, you would just suddenly see like that's how this project was inspired. Was basically sitting on the beach one day, this beautiful, unspoilt beach that you have to hike for half an hour in to get to. There's no roads to get there. It's just super amazing. Got in there, and then suddenly around the corner, this giant black plastic yacht that must be worth like 100 million or something sort of comes into view and just sat there 3 days. Like there was a helipad on it. There were all these kind of jet skis that could come off, but nothing came off it. It just sat there for 3 days, every day, like baking in the sun. And then, the next, the morning after the third day, it was gone. And it was just like, who are those people? Like, and what are they doing inside this kind of air-conditioned, hermetically sealed, black, hulking thing, which is surrounded by paradise, but they're just not interacting with it. So then it wasn't actually so far to kind of make the leap to like, well, it's like a coffin. And then, well, then maybe it's vampires. And like, actually, we're better to hide as a vampire than in this sealed, thing, which, is just completely untouchable as well. These yachts are very untouchable as they bob around, sort of going over borders and not really being very well monitored. It felt like quite an interesting space maybe for vampires to play.
Yeah, I mean, I know exactly that experience that you're having looking at those, because I spent a lot of time in the fall in Acadia National Park in Maine when I was a
Mm.
professional landscape photographer, and I know that part like the back of my hand. And, in addition to cruise ships that are always dotting the horizon, you have those massive private yachts that are parked just offshore, and you can't help but wonder who's in them, and that why it merits that helipad on there.
Yeah.
It's kind of to me, it's that ultimate symbol for wealth. And for that matter, being able to buy isolation from everyone else.
Well, it's
It's
interesting. So it's exactly right. I mean, I always joke with my husband. It's like you're so rich that you can't actually go out. I mean, it's like exactly what you don't want.
yeah,
So it's like the money basically buries you. It becomes a coffin because I mean, the last you become terrified. You might become terrified for your children, kidnapped. You might be terrified of the people around you because they might steal your money. So it becomes really disfiguring. I think like too much money is just something that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy.
yeah.
Obviously you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy to be poverty stricken either. I mean, that's no fun, and it's very damaging too. But it's both are damaging actually.
Yeah, it's a very interesting metaphor to be able to explore narratively too, looking at freedom, because it's one of the last, I would say, free places on the face of the earth where you just don't have the constraints and you're able to purchase that freedom. So an ideals for vampires. It makes a lot of sense. A lot of
Exactly,
sense.
perfect for
Yeah.
them.
Well, aside from place, what were some of your big influences on the project's DNA?
you know, uh, my last graphic novel. I did another graphic novel called Wiper for Dark Horse, but before that I did one called Tumult. And again, it plays in a sort of, it's not in a supernatural space. So, I mean, it's a very different story. But there's something about Patricia Highsmith that I love as a
Okay.
writer. And, particularly the film adaptation of The Talented Mr. Ripley. I knew Anthony Minghella, the director, and it is really one of my favorite films. And this idea of kind of sin in the sun and sort of murder in glamorous places, and and on the beach, and it brings me back to this idea of kind of beach gothic, and that was a really big inspiration. Obviously, this again, if we're going to be less atmospheric and about the mood of the piece, I would maybe define this book as a supernatural psychological thriller, because it doesn't just read as kind of like garlic and steaks and people running around.
Yeah.
It's much more psychological, and it's maybe talking a little bit more about youth and being special and being alienated, and maybe being drawn to things that are self-destructive and destructive influences, but thinking that they might be the kind of, your sort of saving grace. So it's playing all those things out in a space which has got a sort of supernatural edge. And I guess so something like The Talented Mr. Ripley would be an inspiration. I love horror. It's probably my favorite genre in terms of literature and in terms of films. And I'd say maybe something like The Ring and Ringu, the original Japanese version, but also the American version with Naomi Watts is just beautiful and so psychological. And it's almost like the supernatural stuff is just a sort of visual, intensification of the things that are going on in that film. I just love that stuff. So I'm definitely coming from that background. I mean, I look at a writer like James Tinian and all the amazing artists that he works with, which are just too many to name check, although I'd love to because they're all wonderful. I think he does very well in that space of kind of using psychological horror and making it very contemporary, but then it's also very mythological, and you buy it. I mean, I don't want to make it sound too highbrow either, because I want it to be a cracking story, and it's vampires, and I love vampires, so it's got that too. But it's nice to maybe play on two levels.
Yeah, I thought you were going to tell me that you were a writer on the British television series Death in Paradise or something like that. And
No, I wish. Yeah, no.
Well, the location of the Cyclades being kind of an intersection of cultural influences between the East and the West, or Greece and Turkey, kind of allows you to play with various vampire mythologies. You can kind
Yeah.
of take the Western route and add a little bit more into it. Not to get anything away here, but we aren't quite sticking with the strictly Western vampire lore here, as apparently they can trespass on sacred ground, among other things. So, did you have specifics in mind with respect to their origins?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I did, and so that's two interesting things. That's well spotted, and that's not a plot spoiler either, because my vampires are just like, I mean, they've seen Christianity. I mean, they were there way before Christianity, and they'll be there way after. So, I couldn't see my vampires being in the slightest bit interested in Christianity or the cross, or I mean, that vampire who you see in issue 1 is very old and doesn't really care particularly about Christianity. So I thought that was quite fun and well spotted. What I hadn't realized when I wrote the book, well, when I pitched the book before I started writing it really, is when I started looking into the history of vampires in Greece. It's very old. And in fact, the famous mythology, which is obviously in Romania, etc., I thought had kind of filtered into Greece, but it seems to have gone the other way, actually.
Okay.
And therefore, they're vampires in Greece, vrikolakas. And actually, they thought that this idea of giving the coin to the Sharon, the guy who basically will take you across the river Styx, into the afterlife in ancient Greek mythology. That little coin, which was placed on people's tongues when they were dead, and they were buried, was to do with paying the ferryman. But actually, it turns out that later research is saying that it's actually to do with stopping the dead from rising. That the metal holds the body down, and that's part of the mythology. And then what was really interesting is I learned that obviously Greece has been through some really difficult times. Particularly after the Second World War, there was a very bad famine. A lot of people were dying. That's why we had a big Greek community in South Africa. There's a big Greek community in Australia, in America, all over the world, because there was a terrible famine after the Second World War. And during that period, there was a huge spike in the belief of vampires and people feeding on people, dead people not being left outside and walking again. And so it's just really interesting that, right into kind of recent history, there's a very strong vampire lore here in Greece. So I kind of felt that it just communicated itself to me, and I just had to sort of ride the bronking vampire as I go, really. So that was quite interesting. I think that's always such a good sign when you're writing something and then the synchronicities start. You feel like you've tapped into something real, and that's really supports one as a writer, I think. It felt very easy to write when I was writing it.
Okay. Well, I have to thank you because it gave I have an anthropology degree. and focused on mythologies of ancient cultures. So I inevitably went down the rabbit hole with exactly what you're talking about with apotropaic customs regionally, which are objects and practices designed to make sure that the recently dead
yeah,
don't get back up.
yeah,
And there was quite a bit of historical record actually to
yeah,
explore with respect to that in Greece. So
yeah.
are you like a heavy researcher when you write? I'm imagining so.
Um, I'm just a really heavy reader, so yeah. I mean, I read all the time. So yes, yeah. I mean, I was researching. I mean, I wasn't sort of not writing because I was researching, but I mean, I'd been reading all around this as I was writing, and it was really, really feeding. And this. I mean, obviously, Greece is just it's such a turn on. Just there's just so much history and so many layers of history, and it's just wonderful. So one of the other things I learned was spending more time in Greece and going through Athens, basically going to see some of the artwork that's there, and you learn that the old Greek bronzes, the kind of beautifully sculptured figures, which basically inspired and were copied. I mean, even beyond inspired, copied by the Romans and imitated endlessly. And then obviously in the whole of Europe too. I think there's only 250 of them left in the world, which is just incredible to think. So you really there seems like there's a certain kind of cultural magic on these islands, and like you go to the Cyclades and they look completely uninhabited and really wild and everything. And then the more you kind of dig, you realize like they were Mycenaean, and then even Minoan. Some of them are like 3,000, 3,500 years old, like the settlements, very very civilized. So Santorini is obviously a great example of that. And so probably inspired the myth of Atlantis. So you just feel this weight of history in Greece, and it's just so inspiring.
Yeah, I mean, there's all these interesting. I love mythology and the parallels. You look at ancient cultures. So my focus was more on Native American cultures,
Mm,
but looking at Greece, you have the Greek vampire lore. It's fascinating because they were regarded as creatures that eat people's livers, right?
yes,
And that goes right along. There's a parallel between Native American, mythology of undead liver eaters as well. I don't know
really
what it is with livers, but it's kind of strange.
mm, delicious.
I don't mind liver. I mean, liver's
I
pretty.
love
Chicken
liver.
liver's pretty.
Oh, yeah, I'm
Yeah,
totally up for liver. Yeah, just not human,
yeah.
basically. But
Well,
yeah,
yes.
otherwise,
I can't say I've ever gone there before,
no,
but yeah,
no.
yeah. I have had Maasai blood milk, which was yeah,
Oh wow,
my,
seriously? Were you in
yeah,
Kenya?
yes,
Oh,
yes,
amazing.
yeah, yeah. Back on a Dave Matthews tour.
Oh, oh Dave, that's so cool.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a whole other side thing. Like I
Yeah,
started
I'm
actually.
interviewing you on your music years. That would be an interesting.
Sadly, it's just I'm not the greatest storyteller in the world. I think it has to do um, with being spectrum a little bit, So it truly is a shame because I feel like I've lived it, but I'm not the greatest at articulating the experience. But yeah, I started working actually for Dave Matthews. I broke my tibia in two places and was laid up, and the catering company actually happened to be working for Dave Matthews and was
Yeah,
based out of Knoxville, where I was based.
got you.
So they asked, he's like, "Hey, I know you're laid up. Do you want to drive around, the catering truck on this tour for 5, 6 months until you're all healed up?" Sure, I'll do that. So that transition got to know everybody, and then that transitioned into a gig doing more managerial kind of
Fantastic,
stuff. But yeah,
fantastic,
that's how it works. Well,
excellent. And you end up drinking blood milk. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. That and what was it? I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but arag, which is the Mongolian mare's milk that's fermented.
yeah,
Ugh, no,
yeah.
not
Don't
for me.
recommend it. No.
No, no, no. Anyway, getting back to the book. Um, with the two main characters we are following in the first issue, Nick and Alexos, we are getting something of the same struggle, but through very different lenses. Both are dealing with unresolved inadequacies, which is all wrapped up in the mystery of the island and the creatures that are prowling it. And it kind of has an emotional through line. I was curious why that specifically, because vampire fiction come in two flavors, right? You have sexy, or the flip side is like 30 Days of Night, where you get more brutal and savage.
Love
Sad
that.
and anxious isn't the sandbox that you typically expect. So, talk to me about those characters and kind of why you wanted to pull on
Um,
those
oh my God,
threads.
I guess I'm just so closet emo myself. I mean,
Okay.
I just love a melancholy anything. So that's probably my fault. I guess also though, like if we're talking about kind of vampire lineage, I love my Anne Rice, and there's something. I mean, that's very sexy. I hope this is quite sexy as well. There is something of the sort of melancholy or kind of philosophical asides that she sort of meanders through philosophy, and she's quite splendid, and she's quite decadent, and she's quite spooky, and she's quite eerie, and I like that stuff, and I think she actually roots it quite well in human emotion, or in emotions that we could understand, and she intensifies them, these kind of undead characters, and I think I might be playing sort of slightly in the same wheelhouse there, although you might find a little bit of 30 Days of Night creeping upon you as the series continues, but yeah, I like that idea, and again, it comes back to I don't know why I'm name checking it so much, but really, I think if I go back to that Lana Del Rey "Born to Die" album, I think when she released that album, "Summertime Sadness," I was just so pissed off that she'd come up with that phrase. I just thought it was the most amazing phrase, and why didn't I come up with that before her? Like, how could there not be a song called that before that song? And so Summer Shadows was kind of my homage to that, and that mood of that album, which is sort of very glamorous but quite sort of melancholy and quite dangerous, and it's still very beautiful and very beguiling. That felt like an inspiration. That felt quite vampiric. Now, there's
Okay.
something about vampires that's very attractive,
Yes.
you know, very beguiling, but at the same time, like really bad and really destructive and really wrong. So I kind of, these things just kind of started cross fertilizing in my brain, and the story just kind of came from there. And I like this idea of this young guy kind of adrift, looking for his ex who doesn't really want him, looking for him. Again, not a plot spoiler, because it starts off with him reading this postcard from his ex who's just saying, "Don't come after me," and he feels like, was he coerced into that? Does he or actually is he just not getting the message? That's read on to find out.
I definitely got the Anne Rice Vampire Chronicles flavor in
Yeah.
there, which was hugely foundational for me as a teen, for good or for bad, kind of establishing what a queer marital relationship could look like.
Mm,
I was raised in a religious household in the 80s, and it allowed me to kind of mentally explore my own identity sexually, at least mentally.
right.
Um, even if the end result was I'm about as straight as you can be, I've always been grateful to that series for allowing me to explore it in a safe way that I would never have otherwise had the
Right.
opportunity to do.
I mean, I think that that's something that's so important, and I think we're in a time where it's so great that we have won so many bloody hard won victories across the entire spectrum, which is really important. But we can't we for me, so to use Anne Rice and Madonna as two examples, it's like, I think Madonna's erotica and her sex book, I really misunderstood them when they came out. I mean, I loved the video and everything. I just didn't get the book. I just didn't understand what she was trying to do. So it was too much. It was quite gauche. It was just really intense. But I mean, I hadn't realized that, she'd been friends with Mapplethorpe. She'd lost lots of friends to AIDS. She could see that America was terrified of sex. And they'd lost this incredible revolution that had been gained by the gay men who'd just taken sex forward and just become completely uninhibited. Suddenly, like, the US was going back to some like dark ages, and she was trying to hold that space. And and I suppose one nowadays one could criticize her, and could accuse her of cultural appropriation of some description. But I mean, as a young gay man growing up with that woman around, I mean, I wouldn't have. She did the most incredible job, and I guess I still believe that really queer spaces, or talking about race, all of those things. I think we can all agree that should be opening us all up to being really, really open and really curious, not shutting things down, and that's what we need to. I think we need to really fight for together. And I think I love the fact that Anne Rice was this inspiration to you. I mean, I love the fact that Anne Rice was like so into queer fiction, but like actually wasn't very queer herself. Like
Right.
it's just that's cool. I mean, that's what turned her on, and that's what allowed her as a woman to be free. The same as Madonna learned to be a woman through gay men. That allowed her to be the woman that she wanted to be. I think that's so freeing for all of us to look at other people's experiences and allow that to free us, even if we're not the same kind of people. That's beautiful. That cross-pollination is really, really interesting. I totally agree. I loved Anne Rice, and she was a great inspiration to me as a kid. Even though she herself was a straight woman, characters were fabulous and really curious and strange and unusual. So I loved that.
Looking at Nick as a character, and he is in that key at that key age where you're trying to figure yourself out, you're trying to figure out the context of your own identity. And in doing my research for this, I came across you mentioning wanting to explore kind of the pressure of gay men to look young and to seek youthfulness in their partners. And I haven't seen that explored very much in comics. We talk about in our household gay shape, right? And I think it's a byproduct of like binge watching Legendary during the pandemic, right? So we tease our teenager, "Oh, you're in shape, but you aren't in gay shape," right?
Yeah,
And after reading about you wanting to explore it, I can see the potential toxicity, the downside that it could cause. And I imagine those pressures is only amplified in places like Mykonos.
totally,
Um,
totally. I mean, again, it's just so interesting to see what's happened generally. I mean, it's like, you know, I'm all for the patriarchal system being torn down, but what's worrying is that almost like what you want is everybody to benefit from the upside, not everybody to suffer from the downside. And what I've seen certainly in my adult life is young men and older men and middle-aged men and just all men from not being, it's all about their gaze. So they didn't need to look in any particular way. It was all about what women looked like, and then gay men were obviously much more aware of themselves. So, feeling that they had to look good for each other, to being kind of everybody feels that they have to look good and everybody is maybe pushing themselves too hard. So hopefully we come out the other side where everybody feels great about, who they are and how they are. But I think that pressure in a way is almost increased across everybody, and I think, and you're absolutely right. Like, I think for gay men, there are a lot of pressures, and it's a lot of gay men have got real problems with self-confidence and confidence in their masculinity. Feel they have to work out, have to look really good if they're going to be lovable. So it's stuff that I guess as a gay man myself, like I didn't really look at when I was younger,
mhm.
and maybe now that I feel a bit more confident and I'm a bit, a little bit more mature, I can actually look at it and be like, okay, I can talk about the subject, which maybe I wasn't ready to talk about as a teenager, and as a very young man, because I think it's quite difficult to have that perspective and bit of a context, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that I talk to where when they're writing in the queer space, they're often writing for the younger version of themselves,
Mm,
because they just didn't
yeah.
have anything really that much to
So,
look at.
so this is a really, really good. I mean, yeah. I mean, far be it from me to be a buzzkill, but I, I, I worry slightly that again, like as a gay writer, I have to write like incredibly positive stories about gay experience and queer experience because actually it's really hard, and I think it's quite important to acknowledge that and to certainly acknowledge in the past where I mean, it's still very hard. I mean, it's hard. I mean, being straight's hard as well, by the way. So, being a woman's hard, being a man's hard. Everybody has their thing, but I think it's quite important to acknowledge that. I mean, I look at a lot of my friends, gay friends, and there's much bigger problems with addiction, alcoholism, and all sorts of stuff. And I think it's just sort of insecurity as a youngster, and sometimes just mostly outright aggression. is very, very damaging. And it's quite important, I think, to acknowledge that. And I think this book isn't about that necessarily, but I do think you're right in that I think Nick is at a crossroads. He's a young man. He's attracted to rather a dangerous type, and vampires aside, his ex, who's, a human, Anthony, is just isn't very nice, as we can see, and is maybe a bit distant. But he can't let go of him. And I think, that's starting to acknowledge maybe some of that, his insecurity and him never really having felt that great about himself and therefore not expecting somebody to treat him very well. So I'm trying to play with some of those things as well.
All right, let's take a quick break. Hey comics fam, indie comic book publisher Band of Bars just got a level up and announced it is now a cooperative. This heralds a new era for them, including a partnership with Dauntless Stories. And they added several new members to the ownership group. Marcus Jimenez is now Chief Operating Officer, Brent Fisher takes on the role of Chief Diversity Officer, and Joey Galvez is introduced as Head of Kickstarter Ops and Social Media Manager, which is sure to increase their capabilities overall as a publisher. And it further promotes their mission statement of advancing representation, inclusion, and diversity in the medium. They also established a new board of directors to help chart the new path of their journey. With new projects in the works like Alas Goodbye dropping in June, Unbroken soon launching on Kickstarter, and Pond coming up with Dauntless, stay tuned to this space for more exciting news from the growing Bards family. Let's get back to the show.
Well, as a reader, I found it very refreshing. I just got to say, because, and it could be because it's something I've gone through relatively recently myself. But in 2020, I had this big, massive autoimmune event, which really put me on my ass. Right, I couldn't walk without help. I was down to 128 pounds. We found out, we found out it was lupus. But ultimately, where I'm getting at with this story is that my identity, who I thought I was, all this stuff was shattered. So it's really refreshing to see that vulnerability explored in a comic book, kind of in a way I just don't see that much. So anyway, I really enjoyed that.
I'm really pleased. That is a huge compliment, and I think that's really important because, again, to say, your event, the event of maybe bullied or withstanding aggression as a kid for whatever reasons, whatever can happen. It sounds like a cliche, but what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And if you can come through that thing and have that, you have incredible empathy for other people. And if you really come through it, you have empathy for yourself as well. And those things are really powerful treasures to have won. So, again, not wanting to spoil the plot, but that's what I think Nick is exploring for himself. Like, what does he think he wants? And what does he actually want, and why does he think he wants what he wants? And it's an analysis which hopefully is becomes clearer and is presented in a kind of murder mystery which unfolds and is hopefully quite compelling, because I love noir in particular. Like I love noir and I love horror, and I'm playing with those tropes, and I think that's been really fun. I love the fact that you get it more than a hint of the supernatural in the first issue, but you could kind of almost be reading it as a noir or as a kind of murder mystery as well, even though there's something odd up, and that's fun. I like the mechanics of that.
So in the noir genre, and it's an interesting point you just made. So it's interesting to me because your approach to world building is a little bit different, because a lot of that is also focused on non-human entities, right? You have the boat, you have the island, but these are characters. So it's also kind of a way to play with the vampire genre a little bit, because you're taking things and giving them a different version of life, if you will. Was it conscious in trying to look at noir and trying to use this vampire mythology and this place and these things and sort of build the world more? So is it much more character driven? If that makes sense?
It totally was. I mean, it totally was, because it was like a piece of mathematics for me, and that's what made sense to me. It was like I love this, but I love these kinds of stories, and that's what I find compelling. So if I can marry these things in some way, they'll work. And then also, I just want to let the readers know as well. It's just, I mean, I love vampires, and as you were saying that these have some sort of strange oddities and kind of peculiarities, and I loved that as well. Like these vampires, we can have another conversation after the series. We'll regroup because I don't want to ruin it for you. But I've really leaned into what vampires are, and they're very cool. And I've got their own mythology for them, which I think works as its own system. So I'm also not being so kind of highbrow that
Okay.
you sort of lose the vampires in some sort of conceptual metaphor, because I love them as kind of nuts and bolts characters. And if we're talking vampires, we've mentioned these two different poles. Like the one pole for me is Interview with a Vampire, the film, which I think was very beautiful. And Kirsten Dunst was fabulous in it. I agree. I sort of agree with Anne Rice that although Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise are actually really good actors and they really gave it everything, I just think they were miscast. They were just too jockey. I still don't understand how the hell Johnny Depp did not do that role. But anyway, they just didn't work for me. But it was a beautiful film, and I really like it. And then 30 Days of Night is just absolutely incredible. Like the kind of violence of those creatures and just the terror of that film. And then also, what was important is the poetry of it. It's like that balance, of horror. Like The Shining gets that, Rosemary's Baby gets that, The Ring gets that. Like I love that horror where it's genuinely terrifying. I mean, it can be nerve shredding, but it's still beautiful and kind of erotic and sort of attracting you in some way. So those elements are really important to me. And I guess, sorry, I'm rambling a little bit about horror here, but it was such an important moment for me as a kid, like when I was probably 11 or 12, watching Alien, watching Nightmare on Elm Street, like watching all this really gory, sort of horrific stuff. I just adored it as a child. I mean, it terrified the bejesus out of me, but I just adored it. And there was a kind of erotic component and a terror and a sort of, it was like an openness. It was like this is an unexplored world, and anything could happen. And weirdly, that's quite attractive. So that's, I think, in this book as well, is this kind of love of horror and this love of the space that horror allows you to be in psychologically.
Well, let's get into the actual visuals of the book then, because first of all, it's stunningly rendered by Ricardo. His line work remind me a whole lot of Werther's work, as Something is Killing the Children.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, kind of to give listeners that comparison point.
Yeah.
And you've worked on multiple projects together. So now that you have that familiarity with each other's process, are you finding that you're scripting less because you've got a lot of things you're sort of cramming in there?
Oh
So
my God, he is. I mean, I always say that he's like an alchemist. I mean, he's literally like a magician. Our last graphic novel that we did together, Wiper, which is like a sort of Afrofuturist piece, which is set in South Africa, where I'm from. His drawing for that, the level of detail is just absolutely mind blowing. So he just went off on one. The African cyberpunk, and just nailed it. And I'm very obsessive visually as well. So I mean, I think I gave him 500 or 600 reference images for that. I mean,
wow.
The fact that he puts up with that is like he should get the Eisner just for putting up with me. But he's really chilled. He's really open to it. So he does that, and then he processes it, and then he goes off and he does his own thing. And it felt the same on this. There was the image of the boat coming onto the beach, which was real. But then there was also the photo shoot for Lana Del Rey's album, Born to Die, that kind of vintagey, faded colors. That was an important image. And then there was another set of images by this French photographer called Cédric Boucher. Did a campaign for Prada, fashion campaign for Prada in 2001, of all these kind of heroin chic, very skinny models, kind of, sort of drifting around a really brightly floodlit, but very sort of pale beach in these kind of red and white outfits. And they just looked so out of place on the beach and looked so odd and strange and ill and creepy. So obviously I loved it. And that image was suddenly like, those are my vampires. These are the creatures that are in the yacht. These things are coming together in my head. So So I gave that to Ricardo as well, and all these different images that I threw at him. But he is remarkable, absolutely remarkable. I mean, he so to go from cyberpunk and kind of futurism to this, which is much more kind of maybe in the style of Junji Ito and kind of classical horror, like 1950s and 60s, like Kazuo Umezu, and that kind of 50s 60s Japanese horror, which is I'm obsessed with. And we looked at a lot of that too, and the way he can switch styles. I mean, you can immediately see Ricardo's in both of those projects, but his range is absolutely spectacular. So he blew me away with this, and also his storytelling, like how he will split pages and kind of use the pages to show the psychology of what's happening with the characters. It's just masterful. So it was a real honor to work with him again.
Yeah, I was really curious about the opening page because it starts off with a big splash page with a kind of a reflected image down the horizontal center line. I've got a series of my own work of slot canyons in American Southwest that tells like the sequential narration of the Navajo creation myth. So kind of framing them that way. So I have a familiar technique, at least in
Wow.
terms of reference point. Was that your idea or Ricardo's idea? Just curious.
No, that was Ricardo's idea completely. And I can tip my hand to you and say that basically I wanted to slightly shake up the structure of the comic because it was my first floppy on the shelves.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to give Ricardo that space to to really nail the fact that this is not structured like every other comic is structured. And it's not crazily structured. It's not an experimental piece, but um, in Junji Ito's collections that have been printed recently by Viz, I think, they do these collections, and because he's publishing in these other publishing short stories in these anthologies in Japan, he has a kind of chapter heading at the beginning of each of his stories, which is just like a weird image, and those images are just so incredible. And so I wanted to give Ricardo like just a weird image, like at the beginning of each issue, and it's not necessarily a part of the story, but except of course it is all related. But it's not. It's something that you would never be able to draw as an artist in the comic. It's just some kind of high concept thing, or even like a really specific detail that's not seen in the rest of the comic, but is just on that front page image. So it was really just to let him go crazy, and he has done some amazing front images. So I can't wait for you to see the rest of them. And then there was
Okay.
also a little space just to do a little bit of poetry.
Yep.
So I was investigating like quite a lot of Greek poets as well who I've been reading here. So it's just also just a little space just to play conceptually. And if you're not into it, you just flip past and it's just, oh, that's a cool image. But if you want to sort of dive into it and get a bit crazy, like I do with comics, and sort of meditate on it and get really into it, then we've put a lot of energy into that as well. And that's what comics do. Like they're such a special medium, and they're not cinema, and they're not literature. They're their own beast, and we're just trying to max that out with this little floppy as much as possible. God, I'm sounding so like I hope it's also just a really fun story. I mean, it's not quite as strange as I'm explaining it, but I love the medium so much, and I love trying to stretch it and play with it as much as possible.
I really appreciate that, and that's probably the anthropologist brain because I look for all these little hidden details, and you have that small quote at the opening splash page there, and I'll forget their name, but the Greek poet who I looked it up, and I believe they were nominated for several Nobel Prize is in
Yes,
literature. Is that correct?
yes,
Or
Nikos Kazantzakis. Yes, absolutely,
okay,
amazing writer, like poetry and fiction, nonfiction and everything. And obviously, he's a massive star here in Greece. So
yeah,
it'd be nice to get into all that literature as well, which I didn't know so well before. But my mum's actually always been really into Greece and Greek literature. So, I've inherited all of her. She's still around, but I should not say inherited. I should say just stole all of her Greek books now that I'm coming here a lot more and reading my way through them. And it's just a whole different literature, which I didn't know very well. It's great to get involved in that and see it. And of course, the history and the culture in Greece is just so rich. So it's great to dive into that.
are sunglasses or glasses in general a piece of that history? Because one of y'all has an eyeglass fetish because there are so many pieces of eyewear in this book. I don't know why I locked onto that, but there's a lot of them, right? And it's not just the vamps, right? It's not just like a Lost Boys thing. It's like all over the place. So who's got the
Okay,
eyeglass
that's
fetish?
actually me. I have to confess. And if you go back, this is hilarious. I hadn't thought about this. This is the big reveal. You heard it here first. If you go back to like Wiper and you go back to Tumult in particular, there's like a lot of sunglasses. But I don't know.
Okay.
I guess I'm like my child in the '80s, and like it's all about sunglasses and sunglasses at night and shades and cool shades, and I don't know. There's something about that, and if you look at a lot of the '80s vampire literature in particular, there's lots of like you look at what was that Vampire the Masquerade, that role playing game that
Yeah.
then became the comics. Like there's just something about like cool characters wearing sunglasses at night, and obviously you worked in rock, so you know all about that. There's something about that, and then that just relates so well to vampires. So I think I might have gone a bit mad on that. But yes, there's guilty as charged.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, well, that era that we grew up in, where glasses really did become fashion, I feel
Yeah,
like, and as an article,
yeah,
and had really the first eyewear being explored purely for an aesthetic. You
yeah.
know, we had
But
these very those very
there's something important about sunglasses in particular because you know the fact they block the eyes out and it's something that's sinister and or enigmatic or both. It's like the great sunglasses moments. Like you're talking like Jackie Kennedy, you're talking Garbo, you're talking like Rob Lowe, talking like you're talking this sort of there's something about like hiding behind glasses and like black eyes that you can't see into. I don't know that they are. You're right. There's something actually that crops up a lot in my work, and I like them. I think there's something really powerful about a body and that you can see and is communicating. But if the eyes are pitch black and you can't see them, it's very hard to gauge what this creature is. So it's a bit of a shorthand for that, really. Well
yeah.
spotted.
Well, okay. It's sort of a cheat in a way because I grew up in that era. Lost Boys was
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
pivotal, and
Great,
and
great.
on the poster, was it Jason Patrick who's
Yeah,
dropping? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, exactly. So,
yeah,
and it made me look at Lost Boys a little bit further there, because there's even that recruitment angle that you're playing with a little bit. It seems like in Summer
yeah.
Shadows.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. And look, I mean, there is, and it goes back to those things of like, Anne Rice plays with it too. How much would you give for youth? To retain your youth. How much would you give to be alive forever? And what does it mean to be alive forever? And it comes back to this idea of, I mean, I don't want to be gauche. It's like, I'm sure there are nice billionaires out there. Of course, I don't know many, but I don't know many billionaires. So, but but I'm not talking about real billionaires. I'm talking about this concept of billionaires in this post-capitalist society, which is collapsing all over the world. There's just something about that obsession with youth, the obsession with staying alive forever, accumulating power, being more than human, which is just kind of very monstrous, actually, or certainly leads to a monstrous way of being that I think is really useful. To be playing with vampires and that, and so I can play with those ideas outside of the real world, which I always think is more powerful. Actually, to be playing in sort of mythology and supernatural spaces for me as a storyteller fits my thinking really well. Some people can be super journalistic and sort of all about the facts and contemporary facts. I don't really operate like that. It's just a different style, really. So that works for me.
Yeah, the one of the things that really I latched onto there is the currentness of the book and how grounded it is in the now, right?
Mm,
In a location known for antiquity,
mm,
there's modern technology,
mm.
which
Yeah,
most horror
yeah,
comics will avoid like the plague for obvious reasons,
yeah,
right? And I
No, I
get why they
totally
do
want to
it.
play with that, and you're absolutely right. Like I love that. I love it being now. I wanted it to be absolutely now, so that you feel. I still, I think it's harder for horror writers in a way. Like, it's just. I mean, we live in an absolutely horrific world in many ways, but like, it's hard. It's hard to be spooky. Like it's hard to be eerie. It's hard. I mean, like someone like David Lynch is the king of that, right? Like that he can still find these crevices of like weirdness in our everyday life, and um, I really like that. But it's harder to find because we have so much technology and we're so surveilled, and it's all about technology, which is actually extraordinarily boring. So it's harder. It's harder to find the eerie, but it's still there. And sometimes the technology can actually amplify that. So that's it's interesting to play in that space.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I found it really, really refreshing because so many people are just very, very reluctant to dip in that pond.
Great. I'm really pleased you enjoyed that aspect, and it's interesting because you know I hope you can see this in the book as well. Is that we Ricardo and I are maybe sort of slightly nutty in terms of the levels we go to for the work. So, I was determined for him to see this island. So we came over here together for a week. He
Yeah,
bought a camera and he bought a sketchbook and he spent a week. I mean, I knew the hotel that Nick was staying in, and he stayed in that hotel. And I was obsessed with that hotel being where this character lived, and we went to the beaches where I'd seen the yacht, and so it's very much a real place, which he obviously then, I mean, he wasn't slavish about it at all, and he's made it his own, and it's an island. But it was like I felt he had to be possessed by the spirit of the place before he could draw it, and he's just so up for that kind of thing. So he's incredible. Really, he's such a committed artist. And it's interesting because I've mentioned a lot of film references, I've mentioned a lot of literary references, but if I'm thinking about where my career is going, it's like my graphic novel Tumult was translated into French and it was nominated for the big prize at Angoulême, which is the biggest European kind of comics festival. I would say it's for me the most important comics festival in the world. It's amazing. So I was really honored to have that happen. Um, but I actually really love American comics. Like that's what I grew up on. And like, to be honest with you, like as I can sign this highbrow as I want, but like, I love Batgirl and Wonder Woman and She-Hulk and Spider Woman. And that's what I grew up reading. And I love my superheroes as well. I love US comics. So um I really like marrying these things, and I think comics are so good at absorbing these fresh influences and influences from outside, which just expand them, and I'm certainly not putting myself anywhere in the same space as people like Gaiman and Morrison and more, but that's definitely what they did in an unbelievably brilliant way,
yeah,
was to take these, just not, I mean, you you could find it being sort of quite scrappy and quite snarky how they were always like, oh no, we don't really read comics, we're just reading other stuff. But at the same time, they were, I mean, like they were reading other things and just enriching comics so much and writing some absolutely unbelievably good comics. And but, God love them for it. They did such a good job, and I like to do that as well. Like be reading and looking at things in art and photography and cinema and all this stuff. But comics is my medium, and and I also want them to be really entertaining. I like being entertained. I don't want to make it a tough slog for people to get through my work. So hopefully I've achieved that.
certainly have for me. Did comics find you then, or did you find comics? That's an
So,
odd.
going back to the fact that I lived in South Africa in a time that was really quite difficult. It was during apartheid, and it was sort of under a state of emergency, and there was no reporting. All the media was controlled. Everything was very, very carefully controlled, coming in and out, and except comics. I mean, it was hilarious. Like they didn't bother. I mean, they were just comics, so nobody checked comics. So comics came through. So there was a lot of anti-apartheid sentiment in there. I'm thinking
Yeah,
about 2000 AD British Comics Crisis, which is something a subdivision of 2000 AD at a point, very, very anti-South Africa, very anti-political. But even more than that, like just the society I lived in was very controlled. The little tiny slice of white society that was a tiny minority population, awful, awful society, was so boring and it was suffocating itself to death, which luckily it did die a death eventually. But within that space, there was no culture, there was no publishing, there was no music, nothing, but there were comics. And I just remember as a kid, like just these gateways into these different worlds, and just the energy of the imagination was just like a lifeline to me. So, for me, by the time I was 10, I was dreaming in comic panels, captions, bubbles, balloons. And I mean, I was obsessed with comics. And it was only later that, I went to film school and I also write screenplays, TV and film, and I've done a lot of journalism, but comics were my first love and my greatest love. I love the form. I find it so interesting that you can be visual and narrative in the same space. And that's why it's really important for me to have a good connection with my artist as well, because for me, that's just essential, because the two things are so connected. So yeah, I love the form. So, comics definitely found me in a big way. And
It's interesting you talking about that, because it's just got me thinking about the British invasion in comics, if you will. And I've only talked to a few people with South African roots that are comics creators, but it definitely feels like there's a common thread in that repression, allowing you to have very, very different voices. Because it's just something that I'm seeing. It's just very hard to describe. It's a bit ephemeral, but it's different for sure, that you just don't see.
I think it's a different perspective, that allows you. I mean, I often think that, I don't believe that the British creators are intrinsically better than American creators. That's just not the case. But it's interesting how they were allowed to be those rebels. It's like they were being hired because, oh, well, they're British. Like they're crazy. They swear a lot. They can say things. They can kill superheroes. They can, whereas I'm sure there was many, many punk rocker American writers and stuff, but it was just it just wasn't quite as easy for them to have that perspective and actually even to be marketed in that way within the US. So it's interesting how it all happened. I think there's a lot of amazing British creators now. Christian Ward is absolutely amazing. I just think everything he does, art is amazing, but his writing is absolutely awesome. He's got some things coming up now which I've been lucky enough to see in preview, just mind blowing. And plenty others. So I think there's a good scene. But America's booming as well with comics. I know it's a tough moment in industry, but really exciting. There's so much great material.
Well, I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
Is there's just a dearth of things that you can absorb right now, and so we're coming out of this recessive moment, economically. So yeah, but so it's a weird problem to have.
We were talking earlier about James Tinian and his incredible writing and his unbelievable business brain, and that whole team is incredible. Actually, Adam Fox involved, Greg Lockhart as well. Like, just such a great team, and they're all creators too, and hopefully they can change the paradigm. I just don't have a grasp of the industry or how it works to reinvent that particular thing. But thank God there are these brilliant brains doing it.
Well, if I've done my job, hopefully we've convinced some people to help you to get in that echelon. Let's put it that way, right? And convince people to buy some Summer Shadows. And you've given me a dream come true that I can work in a Wu-Tang reference here to start signing off the interview for the first time. So listeners, protect your neck, right? From John's work here. Make sure you get in your order for Summer Shadows. I'm delighted that I got a chance to sink my teeth into what will be one of the standout horror genre reads of the spooky season. I love what I did back there. I thought it was pretty good.
What you did there. Just remember, summer loving sucks, guys.
That's so good. You need that.
So much talking to you, honestly. Really, it's just been brilliant. Thank you for all those insights as well. It's so nice to have it out there. We've been producing it for a long time, so it's just lovely to hear what you thought and that you interacted with it like that. It's great.
Thank you. Well, what else you got going on? I-
Well, I've got another series which is just about to be announced at Dark Horse as well.
okay.
I'm co-writing with somebody that on this show, but I can't talk about it yet. Announced, but I'll be talking to you about it as soon as I can. So
Sweet.
that's coming out really. I mean, we should be announcing within the next month. So
Okay.
that's really exciting, and that's another 4-issue series from Dark Horse coming up. And then if people are smitten and bitten by Summer Shadows, then they should go back to Wiper, which is this Afro-futurist cyberpunk piece that I did with Ricardo and the same creative team. Brad Simpson, the colorist, who's amazing. Campbell, awesome too. And then maybe back to Tumult, which is the other one that I did, which was kind of probably the kind of most critically acclaimed one, and is maybe the most literary. And that was with a guy, Michael Kennedy, who's now working for New Yorker and doing stuff for Sweeney's, and is just an incredible star as well.
Wow.
So to go back and have a look if you're interested, and look out for more announcements soon.
Awesome. Well, where would you like people to find you online? If
You
at
can
all.
find me, I mean, I'm on Twitter, on John H. Dunning, and I'm on Instagram, John Harris Dunning. Always happy to chat. So message away. Tell me
Okay.
what you think when you've seen the issue. The FOC is on the 5th of August, which is really useful if you pre-order. That's a really big deal for us comic creators. And then it's on the shelves on the 11th of September. So let me know.
All right. Well, everybody listening, you know what to do. Call your shops, fill out that Lunar or Previews order form, do the damn thing already, and get yourself a copy, because it is absolutely certified cool in my book. I loved it. So, John, thanks for coming on and chatting with me today. It's been a lot of fun.
I've had such a good time. I hope to do it again soon. Thanks so much for having me, Byron.
Absolutely. We'll definitely get you back on. Well, this is Byron O'Neill, and on behalf of all of us at Comic Book Yeti, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Take care, everybody.
Ciao.
Yeah.
This is Byron O'Neill, one of your hosts of the Cryptid Creator Corner, brought to you by Comic Book Yeti. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of our podcast. Please rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. It lets us know how we're doing, and more importantly, how we can improve. Thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Cryptid Creator Corner, maybe you would enjoy our sister podcast, Into the Comics Cave. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.